It's the guy doing things, and I am back. So good to be back. It's episode 35, and I'm talking to Jason Werbeloff today, social media expert, podcast host, and we're going to talk about the impact of social media. That is why I was away for a while. Such a good feeling to be back, and thank you so much for tuning in. It's going to be an exciting episode. We're going to talk about whether social media really is evil, if it's going to help us save the world, or if it's going to take over the world. Let's see. But it's good to be back, and good to be on the air again. I haven't listened to this jingle in a while, and I'm so excited for this. But for now, sit back, relax. This is episode 35. I hope you enjoy the next few minutes with me and Jason. Episode 35 of The Guy Doing Things. Here we go! All right, so this is my first interview in a few weeks, because I've had the kind of a sabbatical off of social media. And today, joining me, chatting about what I've done in the past few weeks, is Jason Werbeloff. Jason, welcome to The Guy Doing Things.
Thanks very much. So just out of interest, does this count for you as social media?
This does, yes. So I haven't blocked out everything, and I know that's where you're going to get me, because I didn't block out Google. I had to Google a few things, and I see you smirking. We are actually having a Zoom interview, so I can see him smirking. But yeah, the main ones that bothered me: Facebook, Instagram, and all those other. I don't use TikTok, but yeah, we decided to take a break from that. But first, before we get into that, where you're from, what did you study? How did you get into where you are now?
So I kind of took a very diagonal path to where I am now. I run a Facebook advertising company at the moment. So I'm at the heart of the evil that I'm sure the social dilemma told you about. And specifically, I advertise often for on behalf of political clients. So political parties, political organizations. I won't mention names here, but quite high profile organizations. And yeah, we do a lot of the work that the social dilemma warns people about. But I have a very different view on the social dilemma's view on these things. My background is that I studied a PhD in philosophy, so I did not study marketing or advertising. And I ran a software development business for many years. I still run it in the background. And basically, I stopped developing software for a while, for about 7 years, and just wrote science fiction novels. And I had to sell my science fiction novels. And I found the best way to do that was through Facebook advertising. Okay. And I learned a lot about Facebook ads, and then helped other authors advertise their books. And then it became selling lots of things for lots of people. Now I sell everything from political parties to newspapers to kitchen pots to spa products, nice. Robes, candles, books, yeah, anything. And yeah, everything is around advertising that I do.
Awesome. So this isn't actually part of it, but the leap from philosophy to software development, was that just kind of just getting your hands dirty, and then you decided, whoa, I'm actually good at this, I'm going to do it?
So yeah, I like a challenge. I like doing things that I don't know how to do. And philosophy was something I was doing part-time studying, and I had to make money. So I was enjoying programming. I only studied programming at school level, and so I did software development. And that grew big enough that I could stop working for 6 or 7 years and just write science fiction full-time. Philosophy and science fiction are very similar in a certain way, or rather philosophy and programming are very similar in a certain way, and science fiction similar. But the similarity between philosophy and programming is that both are about problem solving.
Hmm.
And, philosophy, you're just trying to solve these kind of very abstract intellectual problems. Programming, you're trying to solve these problems in a user interface.
Yeah.
Trying to find all of these logical solutions to problems, which is very similar to philosophy. So similar thought process.
Yeah.
And then science fiction is similar too. It's about writing, at least in my case, these future thought experiments, which are similar to philosophy. My whole show, Brain in a Vat, it's a philosophy YouTube channel, is about thought experiments, and science fiction is just a series of thought experiments. So yeah, it all kind of ties together.
Awesome. Okay. And are your books available somewhere? Obviously, they can go and watch Brain in a Vat, either on Spotify, listen to it, or watch it on YouTube. And then the books, where can we get it? Because it sounds super cool.
Yeah, so the books are all available on Amazon. So if you go to Amazon, you'll see all my books there. There's 13 novels and a whole lot of short stories and anthologies. Yeah, lots of books.
Awesome.
And yeah, all available on Amazon.
Awesome. Okay. I feel we're going to have to do a part 2 of this where we just talk about your books. I hope you're willing, if Zoom allows us, or if my technology allows me. So you told us how you got into social media. Now, I think from watching the Social Dilemma and applying it to, I also like a challenge. That's why the podcast is called The Guy Doing Things. I just do random things that I want to challenge myself with. And social media was something that you always notice at the back of your mind, there's something fishy. You talk about going to the Maldives one day with your friends. Next day, there's a Facebook ad for it. So it's, all those correlations sometimes feel weird to you. And after watching The Social Dilemma, I started asking myself, the good that social media can do is there, and I acknowledge it and I use it every day. But the bad just started to be highlighted, especially, I'm reading this off now, but this is actually off the Social Dilemma page, where they mentioned a New York Times study showed that the number of countries with political disinformation campaigns on social media doubled in the last 2 years. Now, obviously, we can take disinformation all the way to fake news, all the way to people spreading unnecessary stuff online, and that, to me, as a teacher as well, trickles down to the school level, where you see the youth levels of depression strongly linked to social media use. So all that I mentioned was quite all the way from political to school level. You see social media having a negative finger in the pie, where I've seen many apps that I use to this day actually have a positive impact. So how do you prevent, in your line of work, from the negative side prevailing or becoming a dominant force?
So there's a few interesting points there. So the one is this claim that disinformation campaigns in countries doubled. The number of countries that had disinformation campaigns within them doubled. But that doesn't tell you any information about how much disinformation was in each country. So it could be that there was very little, one campaign in a country. So a more interesting statistic would be the number of disinformation campaigns doubled. And that in my mind sounds like even a low estimate. I would think that it's massively ramped up, and that statistic might be quite old. At least in this last election, this US election, there was an incredible amount of money spent on Facebook advertising. Now, I'm speaking about Facebook advertising for two reasons. The one is it's my specialization, but the second one is it's by far the largest social media platform. People might not know this. They might think Twitter is big or Instagram is big, but actually Instagram is tiny, tiny compared with Facebook. And all advertising on Instagram happens through Facebook, because Facebook owns Instagram. So when you advertise on Facebook, you can just choose whether you also want your ad to go to Instagram. Twitter is also quite small compared with Facebook. So I'm just going to focus on Facebook.
Perfect.
So there was an enormous amount of ad spend during the US election last year on Facebook. And absolutely, there was no guarantee that what was advertised was true. But you have to be very careful, because I think a lot of what the New York Times publishes is false. And so all these publications they have ideological bents. And so when they say there's all this fake news out there, there's all this disinformation, basically what they're saying is it's anything that doesn't agree with us. And often what they are putting out there is also false. And so we're living in an age, I think it is correct what the Social Dilemma says, that we're living in an age where there is a lot of false information out there. But what they seem to assume is that there's a clear truth, right? That there's one body of people. And in the movie, they have this guy who has started an organization, I can't remember the name, and he thinks he knows the truth, right? And he's the arbiter of truth, and everyone else must be shut down and banned, but he should have a voice.
Yeah.
And I have a very big problem with that. So the kind of world that I want to live in, and the kind of world which I strive to endorse and to grow, is a world where there is freedom of speech. And what that means is that there's lots of ideas floating around, and many of them will be false. Lots of ideas floating around, and there's this battle of ideas. People are able to argue with each other. People are able to come up with the truth through all of these disparate positions, and they're able to balance all this information coming at them and disregard false information and take what's true and grow the truth that way. Yeah. So I want a world where there's freedom of speech and as much advertising of as many positions, no matter how false, as possible, with one or two exceptions, which we can come to later. So that's just on the political disinformation side.
Yeah. Can I ask you a question on that? So I love that, and I love the freedom of speech thing, and just taking it back to school, and that's actually my only vantage point. So that's my expertise, is from a school perspective. Now, once you get into this opinionated freedom of speech thing or topic, it kind of triggered something where I've sat in classrooms where pupils as young as 12, 11 have these opinions that you can clearly hear is from another perspective. So that's also another danger, where I totally agree with you. Freedom of speech is so liberating, and to have a complete, I can call it a debate, but civilized debate on opinions and getting to a conclusion. But the feed of what knowledge is coming through, obviously we can't stop that, because in the past, before social media, it was simply just parents telling their kids, this is what we believe. And that, for instance, in my culture where I was Afrikaans, I was told you're a blue bull, okay? and that's a thing. And for long, I didn't question that. I was a blue bull, and blue bull this, blue bull that before. And now we see it on social media, but it's to such an extent where you start getting opinions about abortion, you get opinions about climate control, and that is fed through Facebook. And I think that's where the dangers of it clearly touched base with me, to see 11-year-olds having an opinion on abortion that actually didn't come from any, it could have come from a credible source, but because the mass information on Facebook, maybe 1 out of 10, I have no statistic, this is my statistic, maybe 1 out of 10 sources you get are really, really solid, where the rest are Karens talking about what happens in everyday life.
Good. So what's interesting about Facebook advertising, I can't speak for Twitter, but Facebook advertising, you are not allowed to advertise to children. So you're not allowed to advertise to kids under the age of 18. The minimum age for your targeting is 18 and up. So that will eliminate any targeted advertising of any positions to kids. What they will be exposed to is just people sharing things, right? So that can happen. But that, as you say, seems no different to mom and dad sharing ideas over the dining room table. And I don't understand why mom and dad have any greater access to the truth than an article online. Those articles written online are, unless mom and dad are highly qualified, then it makes sense. But very few moms and dads are highly qualified because of the nature of qualifications. And it's the same for an article. That article might be, the author of that article might be very poorly qualified. But the answer to this problem is not to stop kids going onto social media. The answer to this problem is to provide them with a variety of opinions. So that's something that that Facebook and social media can do for us. It can allow us to share multiple opinions and to teach kids that when they access a certain viewpoint through an article, to think critically about it. Yeah. So this is the most important part of philosophy, is how to think critically. So to read something, understand it, represent it in the best possible light, and be charitable to the author, but then break it down and see what the problems with this are, and then look at alternative positions. And kids need to learn how to do this from a very young age. And if they have that skill, how to take in information without believing it, take in information and look for competing sources of information, we'll live in a much better world. Yeah. The ignorance that is spread through conservative traditions is no worse or better than what happens, in the spreading of information through social media. It's the same thing. It's take what your parents say as gospel, take what your religion says as gospel. Now, it may very well be that what your parents say is correct, and it may very well be that what your religion says is correct. But just because it comes from your pastor or your parents doesn't make it true. Yeah. You need to investigate that. You need to investigate, and social media gives us access to other points of view, which is great.
Yeah, and I think that's the cause for us taking this time off social media was that me and my fiance and I were bombarded with some ideas because we're getting married now. Some ideas about chapels or venues or dresses and stuff came on, and we decided to investigate our ideas. Like, is the venue that we want to pick really the venue we want to pick? And I know it's a silly example, but what you just mentioned is, instead of seeing social media as this big evil, to just take the choices that they do give us and just disseminate them or dissect them. And that it's awesome that you presented us with a solution to say, listen, let's rather teach them additional skills than saying social media is evil. Because the kids sitting in front of me, some of them don't necessarily aspire to be doctors and engineers anymore. They want to become YouTube influencers. And it's a credible dream or aspiration to have in the 21st century. So we need to teach them, if you want to aspire to become a YouTube influencer, to go and pursue that as a legitimate career, you need to have the skills that you just mentioned.
Yeah, critical thinking is very important. You also mentioned how there's a lot of depression and anxiety associated with social media use.
Yes.
So the data on this is very complicated, by the way. There are studies that suggest this. There are studies that suggest the opposite. And those are not mentioned on the social dilemma. The social dilemma is guilty of exactly the thing that it says social media is guilty of, which is one-sided thinking without critically examining the data. Yeah. And what they've effectively done is they've cherry-picked data. So they've said, okay, there's all these studies that say that using social media leads to detrimental effects on mental health. Okay, yes, that's true. But there's also studies that say it doesn't, right? And they're just cherry-picking their data. Another issue is that movie, as far as I understand, was made pre-COVID. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. 2018, 2019. Yeah.
COVID has changed the landscape entirely, and for long periods of time during lockdowns all over the world, the only way people could interact was through social media, or through apps like Discord. And without them, not only would people have been deeply depressed, they would have been isolated in a way that they weren't because of social media. Yeah. So social media definitely has some positives. Just one more note on this is what the studies do suggest is that when people constantly compare themselves with others, they feel bad. So when you have a look at a feed and everyone is putting their best foot forward and all their beautiful holiday photos and photoshopping their faces and putting filters on and making their whole life seem good. Yeah. And then you look at that and you think, well, my life sucks, but you put up your best photo. What's really happening is that they're thinking the same. My life sucks.
Yeah.
And this ability to compare ourselves with others, we do on a daily basis anyway, and kids do in schools anyway. It's just that social media allows them to do it much more frequently, and so it can have detrimental effects. Yeah. But again, there are skills that can be taught to people to cope with this. And one of them is they've found that when people interact on social media and directly communicate with each other without posting publicly, but directly communicating, so talking one-on-one through direct messaging, they don't feel that anymore. They don't negatively compare themselves to others. And then social media actually becomes a great tool for connection.
Yeah. And I think that's where I wanted to get at, is to get to a solution. We can have a debate the whole day long about saying this is good, this is bad, this is good, this is bad. But we need to understand how to engage this tool in a valuable way. My mom stayed in Denmark for 3 years. So the only way to, actively integrate with her or to talk with her was also through Zoom and social media. And I think that was a valuable tool, and I saw it hands-on. But I've also been on the other side where I've seen people in my peer group, finishing their degrees, buying fancy cars, and you feel that kind of weight starting to crush on you. And I think the question isn't, is it good? Is it bad? I think the question should be, how do we use it effectively and how do we use it responsibly? Because if the studies show, yes, they do lead to higher mental health issues, or they don't, the thing we should ask ourselves is, why are there studies being made? Is because there has to be a source somewhere, and there has to be a bigger question to be asked. How can we engage this tool as to not overuse it or misuse it? Because we do see stuff, whether those studies are true or not, we do see misuse, addiction, mental health issues, not necessarily with regard to that, but it can hype it up. So I think you've answered the question in a valuable way, and I appreciate that.
Yeah. Thanks. I see this as very similar to the Industrial Revolution. So in the Industrial Revolution, or the printing press, for example, all of these discussions that you're raising were raised when the first print media came out. Yeah. So when newspapers and books started being disseminated, there was a mass outcry. There were lots of people who said, there's going to be evil printed in these books. Yeah. There's going to be disgusting smut that's printed in these books. Look, there's pornography in these books. And good old conservative traditional values like the Bible are no longer going to be upheld. We're going to have all this smut, and people are going to read this, and it's going to get to our kids. It's going to filter down to our kids. They could, little Johnny could pick up some print media, and you don't know what he's going to get exposed to. And you see, you laugh now because these days our view has shifted to print media being great. Right? We encourage kids to read, but that was not the case when the first books came out and the first magazines came out. And then, the same with the Industrial Revolution. With the Industrial Revolution, it was like, oh my gosh, now there's going to be all these factories around. And if these factories are around, they're hiring kids to work in these factories. And it's the end of our innocence, our age of innocence. And instead of resisting technological developments, we need to learn how to work with them. Yeah. There's an area of the internet. Ironically, they're on the internet, but there's a number of people who believe that whenever there's progress, you need to immediately remove it. You need to go back to the good old days, and they always lose, because the one thing about technological progress is that once it's out the box, once that Pandora's box is opened, it's out, and you cannot put it back in. Social media is here to stay, and kids are going to get onto social media whether you want them to or not. The best thing we can do with kids and adults is teach them how best to use it rather than how not to use it. Because, it's the apple in Eden. Once you know it's there, you want to take a bite.
Yeah.
And if parents discourage, it's only going to increase the temptation to use it.
Yeah. And I'm so glad we had this conversation. I mean, at first, when you said you work on the other side, for the other side, and I think it's a good thing that we could have the perspective from the social dilemma. And I think although they do have misleading information, or they are a bit extreme to the one side, the one thing that they did do was make us aware. And the same thing that you are also saying, we need to be aware of what's around us. Jason, I think we should organize a part 2, definitely. But this was so awesome. Thank you so much for your time. And thanks for sticking through. I called Jason 3 or 4 times. It didn't work. Then there was emergency at his house. I didn't have internet. I didn't have stuff. So having this interview is just amazing. So thanks for your time. I really appreciate it. Go and listen to Brain in a Vat on Spotify or on any podcast app, or even on YouTube, where you can actually see him. It's more interesting if you can see what he looks like, because that's super cool. Is there any place else we can follow you? You are not on you are on Instagram, but there's not a lot of stuff going on there. It's probably because of the dangers. I'm kidding.
So I'm like the plumber who doesn't fix his own pipes.
Okay.
I'm a social media expert, but I don't actually have many profiles on social media.
Okay. So if they want to follow you, just go and follow your YouTube page or somewhere on Spotify, not on Instagram. Yeah. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. Jason Verbeloff, this was episode 35 of The Guy Doing Things, the social dilemma. And as we just heard, it's not such a big dilemma if we know how to use it. Thanks so much for listening. Well, there you have it. And until the next episode, please wash your hands, wear your masks, and stay safe. Goodbye.